Hey everybody, welcome to this session on Adobe FrameMaker, where I'm going to go in and spend a little bit of time talking about some of the basics of templates. I want to explore character formatting, paragraph formatting, and some basic page layout. I'm going to do it using a set of actual files that are included with the product. So when I choose File, New Document, and scroll down to the bottom, I have an Explore Standard Templates, and that's the one that I would suggest you go with when you want to begin playing with some of the content that's inside FrameMaker. There's a lot of default documents that are included, and part of that includes a sample user guide, which has a chapter. And clicking on chapter, I can go in and then choose show sample. That's going to open up the document. It's got some layout. It's got a little bit of configuration so that I can start to demonstrate some of the functions, and it's also something that you can play along with at home by opening up the file and pausing the video. So one of the first things I'd suggest anytime you're working with a FrameMaker environment is going in and choosing the workspace that's best suited to what you want to do. In this case, I'm going to work with the author one, and when I choose authoring and it configures things on screen, it may not necessarily be the default. So the other piece that I always suggest is to reset the workspace, and that's going to put it back to its original layout, and that's sort of what's provided out of the box by Adobe. The document that I have open right now has paragraph tags applied, and there's a couple of things that you can do. When you look down into the bottom of your screen and you check on the left side, you're going to see the flow name, flow A, and then there's the backwards paragraph, the P symbol, the Pilcrow, and it reads hashtag S_number section, or number sign S_number section. So that's the name of the paragraph tag. And if I click over into general description and highlight a little bit of it, you'll see that that's set up as an H0, heading 0, and then the text this section provides is a body begin, and lastly I'll click down into the bullet where the cross-reference for history of flight is, and you'll see that that's a B1 bullet level 01. Each of these is a format that's predefined, and the options that exist when it comes to working with some of these formats are pretty broad. FrameMaker has a lot of functional support built into it for paragraph formatting. If I take a look in the documents, I'll just scroll down a little bit. You'll see that there's a couple more paragraphs. This one here is the BC body content. I have propeller-based flight, which is set up as a definition term, and then I have some text that comes after it, which is the definition description. There's a bunch of non-printing symbols that appear as well. Between the bullet, for example, and the word overview, or the bullet and the word vehicle structure, you'll see that there's a little tab symbol showing up. In the cross-reference between the word page and the number, there's the symbol that shows it's a non-breaking space and then the paragraph mark. So you can choose view and at any point go in and turn off the text symbols if you want to see the document a little more representative of what it might appear as when it's printed or delivered. I'm just going to put the text symbols back on, and when I turn on the text symbols, you'll see that after propeller-based flight, the paragraph mark is set up so that it actually runs in with the following text, which is a really cool feature of FrameMaker. It's a format called run-in heading, and I'll show you a little bit about how that works. Continuing to scroll downwards, I have some conditional content here in regards to the history of flight. So the 3D import and publish features, I continue downwards, I work my way through the content, and lots of material in here. Most of it is text, and all of that text information is actually set up using paragraph formatting. So the paragraph format gives you the overall look and feel of all of the content in any one paragraph. That can include things like background colors, auto numbering, the configuration of default text like result of this task automatically being assigned, and just working through the document, I get down to a task. Now if you're trying this on your own, if you're working your way through the document, this is on page number 10, but it's 8 of 12 sheets, because prior to this there would be, for argument's sake, a cover page or a table of contents that changes the page numbering. In any case, within the steps, step 1, launch your personal primary control dialog. And when I click and highlight a little bit of primary control, or even if I single click in it, you'll again see, if you look down to the bottom and on the left hand side, the flow is A. It is a S1, a step level 01 start, and the text primary control is set up in a character tag called DT for dialog title. And select seat configuration. Again, I can highlight a little bit of it, or I can just click in it, and this is MO menu option. So these are character formats, and the big difference between a paragraph and a character formats are usually applied to content within a paragraph, and it overrides the paragraph's default font settings. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of sort of the big picture idea of a paragraph tag versus a character tag. Over in the right side of the screen, I've got a bunch of catalog options showing. I have a find, change, and marker window. I'm going to open up a couple of dialogues. They'll appear in different places. I'll configure things on screen. Based on your screen resolution, you may have more or less space to work with. But in any case, you want to go in under Format, and if we're working with paragraphs, choose the Paragraph Designer. I'm assuming you're already comfortable with the paragraph catalog of being able to see a list of paragraph tags and applying them by clicking in a paragraph and then choosing from your catalog, or clicking in a paragraph and pressing function 9, which is your keyboard shortcut for the paragraph catalog to pop up on screen. And that's one of the reasons you see a bunch of 2-letter codes in here, like B1 and B2 or H1 and H2 and H3, so that you don't have to type as much if you're using a keyboard shortcut to get to any of these tags. In any case, Paragraph Designer, keyboard shortcut for it is Control-M, and when I click on it, it opens up the Paragraph Designer. And again, that's set up over at the side here. The designer has a set of tabs running across the top with icons, and these represent things like the basic properties. And the basic properties allow you to go in and set up things like your indents or your spacing between paragraphs, the alignment and the tab stops, as well as what comes next. The second of these icons brings you into the font, and in the default font, you have a lot of options about the appearance of the text content. And then the third one gets into pagination. So if we're looking at the pagination properties, it allows you to configure where content is going to start, whether it's at the top of a page or the top of a column, as well as keep togethers and wood orphan lines, which determines the likelihood that content wraps from one page to the next. And then in the format section, you assign the placement. So these are the sort of 3 core tabs that I'm going to focus on for the first little bit as we start doing some work related to the paragraph properties. When I go in and I start selecting content and making changes, there's a couple of relatively minor things that'll happen, or a couple of pretty major things that will happen, depending on how you go in and you start to make your changes. So I'm going to take a look at a couple of paragraphs. I'm going to scroll up a little bit so that I can get a set of paragraphs that's pretty easy to work with, and as I make changes, you won't see things jumping all over the place. So I'm going to click here in these paragraphs. These are the bullet level 1. Rather than clicking on the word overview or history of flight, which is the cross-reference, I'm clicking just a little bit off to the right of this so that it places the insertion point in the paragraph rather than on the cross-reference. Technically, it doesn't make much of a difference. You've clicked inside the paragraph, but I want you to focus on the idea that I'm in the paragraph, not on the highlighted cross-reference. So this paragraph, I'll start off with basic properties. So I click on the very first 3 icons in the paragraph designer. And the indents. The first indent is currently set to be 1/4 inch, and the left indent 1/2 inch. That's to accommodate longer text. So if I click in the document and I add a bunch of text to force content to the next line, you can see that the next line has the 1/2 inch indent. And the reason that there's a 1/2 inch indent is because there's also a tab stop after the bullet symbol. If I again go in under View and I turn off my text symbols, you can see that there's a nice even alignment. I'll sort of mock it up here a little bit with a graphical representation on screen. There's a nice little even alignment right along the edge of this for all of the content from the quote next to overview through to the words to the next line. Going in and changing around the first indent, let's say I make the first indent 0 and I apply, it makes a change to this one bulleted piece of information. You can see the bullet is pushed over all the way to the left of this text frame. If I do an update all, it redefines all instances of the content inside this document. So every single B1 bullet level 1 now has the same properties. As a general rule, that's probably what you should be doing as you go in and you create or update the look and feel of a standard template. Use that update all. I'm just going to go in and change the indents a little bit. I'll give it a first indent of 1/2 inch, so 0.5, and then I use tab, and I'll give it a left indent of 0.75 and update all. Now this pushes the content in, but you'll see that the bullet runs directly into the beginning of the text, history of flight or overview, And that's because my tab stop is currently set to be equal to the first indent. Ideally, if you're doing a bullet list or a numbered list, you want to make sure that your tab stops are pushed over even with your left indent. So I double click, change that to 0.75. I click continue or I press enter, and once more I update all. And the reason it doesn't constantly change is that you could be making all kinds of little adjustments inside this dialog, and you don't want your document to be jumping all over the place. Depending on where you're working in the paragraph designer, this can get pretty involved. So the idea of apply is a one-shot deal, change just this one paragraph. That's kind of useful if you're doing a little bit of testing, if you want to do a few tweaks and see what happens. Update all redefines the style throughout the entire document. A few other things that you can do inside here. I can change my space above or my space below. So I'll take my space above and make it none, my space below and make it none, and once more I'll update all. And this now pulls those three bullet paragraphs much closer to each other. The first bullet, though, still seems to have some space between history of flight and the text that comes above it. The last bullet, vehicle structure, has some space between it and the words flight used to depend on an aircraft that follow. The reason for that is that the body content paragraph, the BC body content that I'm currently in, has a space above of 8 points, and the very first paragraph, the BB for body begin, has a space of 8 points below. FrameMaker does something really nice. If I click inside one of these pieces and I change my space above or my space below, let's say I change it to 6 and 6, which is what I had earlier, and I update all, you'll see that history of flight did not move because it does not add together the 6 points of space that I have above to the 8 points of space that I have below. So the 8 points that are below this paragraph are greater than the 6 points in this paragraph for the space above. And FrameMaker takes the higher of the two values. Of course, if they're equal, it doesn't make a difference. It just puts in, for argument's sake, 18 points in between if that was the space below one and above the other. FrameMaker is great for this, and you get a lot more control over exactly how your format appears inside your document. Now that's a little bit of the basics of working inside this environment, and I want to take it beyond what we have right now. These are paragraph tags that already exist. If you want to build your own, so I'm going to scroll through my document a little bit, scroll down a touch, and I get to an area where I have a bunch of paragraphs, a lot of text, and I want to make a change. So here we go. The outside of the vehicle is made up of aluminum and epoxy. Re-entry temperatures can exceed 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside temperatures can plummet to minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a chunk of information that I decide is really important, and I want to create myself something called important. It's going to be based on some paragraph tag. Now I could base it on something like a cell figure, or I could base it on a bullet level 2. I'm just going to start off with a body content. This kind of sort of has some of the format that I want. It's not 100% perfect, but it's a starting point. I have created a paragraph tag that I want to base the new paragraph tag on. Then I'm going to take my commands and I'm going to choose new format. So this is done inside the paragraph designer. Commands, I choose new format, and I get a pop-up that says, what do you want to call this thing? So I'll call this really important. I'm going to store it in the catalog so that I can reuse this format, and I'm going to apply it to the selection. And just to be consistent, I'll call it RI underscore really important. It's not necessarily a great name, but the idea is that I'm giving it a tag that starts with a 2-character identifier so that it's consistent with everything else that I have in my catalog. And again, it'll make it easy for people who are using keyboard shortcuts to apply this. So I create the format, and now this new paragraph format is applied. The current paragraph tag that I've just triple-clicked in order to make it really clear what I'm working with is called, if you look in the bottom on the left, RI really important. It's set up with a first indent of 1/4 inch. It's set up with left and right indents that don't exist, an alignment that's justified. It has a bunch of properties that exactly match what we had when we worked with the initial body paragraph, the BC body content. That's because I've based it on it. What I'm now going to do, though, is make a couple more tweaks. So I'm going to give it a first indent of 1/2 inch, a left indent of 1/2 inch, a right indent of 1/2 inch. So I update all of those. I will leave the space above, but I really want it to stand out. So I'm going to increase the space below to something that's a little bit of overkill, I'll give it 36 points. Now 72 points is an inch, so 36 points is half of an inch. That's the number that I want you to remember, that I put in half an inch, 36. I choose Update All because I want to redefine all instances of this paragraph, and it changes. If I single click in the paragraph, you can see that I get the insertion point. If I highlight a couple words, I'm still in the paragraph, and that's the important piece here. That new format for RI, really important, has some changes in the indents and spacing, and I'm going to now go in and change the appearance of the content. So I click over into the default font, and what I'm going to do is change the font size to 14. Now there's a drop down that I can choose from, or I can just type in a value. I'm making it 14. I'm going to change the weight on this to be bold so that it stands out a little bit more. And maybe I'll give it a background color because this is really important, and I want the background color on this to be pale green. And I update all. I've now redefined this, but here's the part that's interesting. Because I changed the font size after I went in and I set my spacing to 36, it has automatically made an adjustment here to 42 points. FrameMaker will proportionately resize your space above and space below based on your font size. That means that if you have something that's initially a font size of 9 and it has space above and below of 9, just to make the math easy, and later you change the font size to 36, well, at that point, a 9-point gap above and below is hardly noticeable. So FrameMaker would automatically scale that up percentage-wise based on the changes that you make into your default font. I'm just going to go in and tweak a few things here. I'll go back to the default font. I'm going to remove the background color. So I have to click not once, which means as is, but twice, which says do not apply background color, and I update all. I'm also going to go in and change my font family. I have a ton of different fonts on here, but I go through and I'll choose Garamond and update all, and it changes the appearance once more. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is a little bit of a test based on some of the settings that are here in the pagination. In the pagination, it currently has a configuration of widow and orphan lines of 2. So I'm just going to take the previous paragraph, and I'm holding down Shift and pressing Enter several times. Just to show you what's happening, I'm going to choose View and turn on my text symbols once more. So Shift-Enter just adds non-breaking spaces. I'm basically taking this paragraph, if I triple-click in it, I'm saying treat it as a paragraph with a bunch of extra empty paragraphs below it. Not a good idea. Don't normally do this. I'm only doing it for testing purposes, and you'll see now near the bottom of the page it has the 1, 2, 3, 4 and the A and B, and as I continue to add some of these, the whole chunk of information vanished to the next page. 1, 2, 3, 4, A and B, as well as materials are used in a preferred order. Why? Well, it's because reinforced carbon fibers in a paragraph that's set up to keep with next, so I'm just shading that so that you see where I'm clicking, and it's also set to keep with previous. In other words, pull stuff from the previous page and keep it with whatever comes next so that I don't end up with something along the lines of 1 at the bottom of the page, 2, 3, 4 at the top of the next page. The other paragraphs, 2, 3, and 4, are also set up in the same way. They're set up to keep with next and keep with previous. And the A and the B are set up to keep with previous. That means that if I have my A and B followed by 5, 5 would be a spot where a break is allowed. This configuration allows me to decide what keeps together, but it also means that sometimes I end up with extra white space on a previous page. I'll come back to that in a few moments, but first let me go in and just do a couple more shift enters to get this paragraph down to the bottom of the page as well. Now it's getting down into that area. What you're going to see, because the widow and orphan was set to 2, the content splits between 2 pages. So now I have the outside of the vehicle, re-entry temperatures, and then the can exceed goes on to the next page. If I wanted this to keep together internally to the paragraph, I could increase my widow orphan line. If I change it around to a 1 and I decrease it, and then I choose Update All, it now allows a single line to break to the next page or to stay on the current page. When it moves to 2, which is what we had a moment ago, and I Update All, it bounces 2 lines to the next page. And if I try 3, well, it's not large enough to have 6 lines of content. So now when I go to 3 and I Update All, it jumps to the next page. This may or may not be exactly what you're looking for, but the idea is that you can go in and you can configure this information in a couple of different ways. I think I inadvertently changed something there. There we go. So I've got it set to width orphan lines of 3, and it forces all of the content. I drop it down to 2, and it allows it to split between the pages. And if I come along and I start deleting a couple of those shift returns that I've put in there, and I have enough room, then I go back and I say, hey, step 2 and 3 and 4. You know what? Just keep with the previous, not necessarily the next, or even better, I turn off both of them and I update all. What you'll see in the document is a change as soon as enough space is available. Let me go in and make a little more space here for the content to split across the page. Now I can have materials are used, reinforced, 2 is high temperature, 3 and 4 onto the next page. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the keep with next and previous, as well as the widow and orphan lines. I can also take my document and do a couple of other things. Let me just clean this up a little bit to remove some of the extra content. And I'm going to scroll upwards in the document. And here you can see 1.32 is the wing. I'm going to click in the wing section and zoom away on my document so that you can see a lot more pages. This is the wing information. And in the wing information, I'm currently configuring it so that the heading 2 will start anywhere. I can change that to start at the top of a page or a column if I have a multi-column layout, or top of a left or a right page, which is kind of useful if you're putting together something and you need chapters, for example, to always start at the top of a right-hand page. I'm going to go in though and use top of page and update all. Now that dramatically increases the page count. It has 14 pages, but you'll see that every single heading 2 starts on its own page. So if I highlight a little bit, if I zoom back in on that information, there's a heading 1, here's a heading 2 for crew area, starts top of a page. I continue to scroll downwards, and then I get to a bit of information that again breaks. So the bottom of this page has a bunch of blank space. And if I continue to scroll, I get to the information on wing, which is top of page. The wing information is also inside something called the side head. FrameMaker has the ability to configure side heads. So when you're doing page layout, this is something that you can think about. The side head is this dedicated space that doesn't contain the bulk of the content of the body. And there's several things that you can do with the side head. I'm going to scroll downwards once more to this text, the really important piece, and play around a little bit with some of the things related to the side head. If I set up the content to be across all columns and side heads, this is now going to stretch across not only the column that it's in, but into the dedicated space next to it. So now it goes across all columns and side heads. I could also decide to just put it into the side head. I'll leave the alignment on first baseline, and I'll do an update all. And now it appears in the side head. It's pretty large text because of the indent, but you'll notice hopefully that the out side lines up with the bottom of materials are used in. This is a little bit tricky to see at this zoom, so I'm going to try zooming it in a little further and then scroll over and increase the font size. So I'm doing a bunch of changes now. I'm going to pump up the font size. I'll go with 18, update all. Because it's in the side head, I'm not a big fan of having all of those indents, so I'll change the indents, update all. And now you can probably see a little more clearly that the top of the letter F and the top of the M are not in alignment with each other. Instead, the bottom of all of the text here is in alignment with the bottom of all of the text here. If I change around the properties, and this is part of the pagination, if I change the pagination property so that instead of first baseline, it is top edge, and I update all, what you'll see is that the top of the F in of lines up with the top of the M in material. So there's a lot of configuration. You don't have to memorize all of the different options and possibilities that exist, but I want you to be aware inside the paragraph designer that you can change around for any given paragraph properties that include things like the indent and the spacing. So the first line indent or the subsequent indent, if I give this just a left indent of 1/2 inch and I update all, you'll see that all text after the first line is indented, but the first line is not. A right indent is from the right-hand side of the margin. My space above, below, and my line spacing is the gap between paragraphs or the gap within a paragraph. So if I tighten up my line spacing, which is currently 23, and be careful if you go in and you change these numbers. I'm going to go to 1.5 and do an update all, and you'll see that the text spaces out further. It's sort of 1.5 space, double space, etc. But if I put this line spacing too low, let's say I put it to 12 and I update all, I may end up having my text crunch into other text in the document. The fixed line spacing is kind of a cool one as well. Let me actually add a little bit of text here, and I'm just going to add in some text that doesn't seem to make much sense. But I'm going to type in H2O, and I'm going to type in E equals MC squared with a 2. If I take these numbers and I take the H2O and I take the 2 and set it up so that I change the format of just the character, so I'm applying an override, and I take a look through it, I don't have anything that does exactly what I need. I can't go in and set it to superscript or subscript here, but I can change it by the style. So I'll make this one into a subscript so that it descends below the line, and I'll change this 2 into a superscript. So again, format, style, superscript. The 2 in H2O descends below the line. The 2 in MC squared ascends above the line. If I turn off my fixed line spacing, so I make sure that the check mark is completely gone and I update all, you'll see that it leaves a little bit of a gap. And if I take out the H2O, you'll see that the gap between the middle line and the last line, or I take away E equals MC squared, that it tightens up a little bit. So fixed line spacing is what allows you to force the line gap between lines within a single paragraph to stay consistent. I'll just undo it twice and show this to you one more time. So I turn on fixed and I update all. It now pulls the material together, and you run a possible risk. It's not to say this will happen, but there's definitely a possible risk that you have something like this, and as the content begins to edit, you run the risk that the numbers may collide with each other. So just be aware of that type of a feature. Also, if you're putting graphics in line, if you have things like click on this icon or that icon to save or to open, then sometimes the graphic size is such that it bumps into the other text in a paragraph. If that starts to happen, just consider this fixed property and turning it off and doing an update all and see if it resolves the issue. And there you can see there's definitely a large gap between the first line and the second line, and no gap between the second line and the third line because there's no descender. There's just the ascender for MC squared where I have superscript, and the descender here for H2O where I have subscript. Just going to do a bunch of undos to clean things up a little bit and take out all of those extra bits of content that I typed in and knock it back down to the default paragraph. Also going to clean this one up and change the line spacing. It's really easy to go to a single line spacing by choosing it, clicking update all. So that talks a little bit about the paragraph designer. You do have things like the alignment that you can configure, pretty straightforward with the options, and what the next paragraph is. That's really helpful when you have something like this. Reinforced carbon fiber is my beginning of the list. This is what resets the count. Problem is that if I click at the end of my list level 1 begin and I press enter, it moves on and it becomes a continue, which is great. And the reason it does it is that the next paragraph tag is already configured. If I don't have a next paragraph tag, for example, this paragraph doesn't have one, it defaults to more of the exact same paragraph. Sounds like an okay idea. I mean, once it's set up, it's great. Let's go back over to this really important piece and retweak it into something that is closer to what we originally had. So I'll give it an indent of 1/2 and 1/2 and 1/2 of an inch. Update all. I'm going to change the font setting on this a little bit so that it's a touch smaller. We'll go with 14 point. Update all. I will also set it up so that it is in the column, and I will update all. So now the content's put back roughly where it should be. I usually don't have a lot of really important stuff that goes in a row, so as soon as I'm at the end of really important right here, and I click and press enter, I get another one. That's not what I really want. What I would like is for it to just be followed with just one of those normal BC body content. So instead of this, I want to press enter and get a BC body content. Well, sure enough, I can go in here and scrolling through, I click BC body content and once more update all. That redefines all instances. I can just delete this information out of here, click at the end of this paragraph one time. So I get an insertion point. I press enter, and here is the BC body content. It's doing exactly what I expect it to do. And the benefit of this is that you can guide authors with a good template so that they're creating content roughly in the order that you expect it to. And you just make their life a little easier, which is always something that we should be striving to do when we build templates. Let's do one or two more things with this paragraph. So I've shown you the really important or other paragraphs for the basic properties, for the default font, and for the pagination. The default font, generally pretty straightforward. It's sort of like two columns of layout. It has the name of the paragraph tag and then some font properties. Next to that, it has a bunch of checkboxes with format options. All of the information that's inside the paragraph designer for this default font tab is configurable and overrideable, if that's a real word, by going in and using something called a character tag. So I come along and I'm going to take the word vehicle and just switch to my character catalog and make that into an emphasis heavy, which changes the appearance of it. I'll take the word epoxy and I'm going to set that up to be link text. I'm not saying these are great decisions. Outside, I'll take that information and set it up to be a menu option. So I've done a little bit of formatting. If I click, you can see that some of the text is now bold and the font has changed. Some of it is blue, or blue with italic, blue without italic. It's a bunch of different formats using character tags that override the default of the paragraph property. So the character tags override default font. If I come along and I change my default font from 14 point down to 10, and I update all, font changes, the sizes are still smaller, but this retains the emphasis heavy, this retains the link text, and this retains the MO menu option. Again, if you look into the bottom left, you'll see that it has the flow A, the paragraph tag is called RI, really important, and the character format, the character tag that is applied here is called MO menu option. I will go back to the character tags and the character catalog afterwards, but I wanted you to see a little bit of that in regards to the paragraph called really important. And part of the reason I wanted to show it to you is because I'm going to make a decision here to change the paragraph that I'm currently in into just body content, and now that resets it. And then I can use my delete button inside a catalog in order to clean up my template. So if I look at all of the different things that exist in this document, and I scroll through, I will find eventually the RI really important, which I can select and then delete. Then I choose done. And by the way, if you delete something that is currently in use, it will still continue to be in the document. It just won't be in the catalog and it shows up as an override. So you can create formats, you can develop formats, and if you don't need them, delete the formats in order to keep the template as clean and tidy as you can. I'm going to talk a little bit about character tags in more detail now. In order to do better work with the paragraph tags, we use the paragraph designer, and that allowed us to go in and change things like the basic properties, the pagination, and the default font. And I'm clicking over to default font for a moment, and then I'm going to choose format, character designer. So the keyboard shortcut for this one is Control-D. When I open the character designer, it opens up beside the paragraph designer, and you'll see that the character designer looks almost exactly the same as everything to do with the paragraph designer when it comes to the default font. It just doesn't have all the extra tabs over the top. So the character designer is where you develop character formats. There's something important that comes into play when I'm working with this. Right now I have the word vehicle, and this word is set up as EH emphasis heavy. If you carefully take a look in the character designer, you're going to see that it's set up to be size 12 point. I want you to keep an eye on that piece, and it's also set up with a color of black. Keep an eye on those two, because what I'm going to do is take the word thermal and I'm going to set it up using the character catalog to also have the format that's applied to vehicle. So I'm going to set it up to be EH emphasis heavy which currently reads 12 point and black when I have it highlighted here. Thermal becomes EH emphasis heavy. Now it reads 14 point and the color is the corporate color primary. It's that blue. So how can I have two sets of characters that are both called EH emphasis heavy and have a different visual appearance? Good question. Here's what's happening. I'm going to click in the margin. So I'm just clicking away from any content and my character designer goes completely blank. That's usually your safest bet when you're working with a character designer. Inside here, if I click the drop down and I take a look at what an emphasis heavy looks like, the rule is add Myriad Pro, make it bold. Everything else is either a blank value for things like the size, or as is for things like the angle and the variation in the color, or where there's check mark options like underline, overline, and strike through, it is set up with an as is. So basically what EH emphasis heavy says to do is to add Myriad Pro and make it bold. It doesn't care about the color, it doesn't care about the italic, it doesn't care about the spread and the stretch and the language and the underline, the overline, etc., etc., etc. It only adds Myriad Pro and it adds bold. Well, those are properties that were already in place on thermal protection. So in actuality, when I assigned EH emphasis heavy or I reassign default font, I don't actually see any difference there. Now if I was to go with emphasis italic, it adds the italic the same way that down here in, let's say, plummet, I add emphasis italic. And it looks like Myriad Pro 12 italic, regular, regular, black, whereas this one is not 12 and black. This one is 14, and again, it's that corporate color blue. So I click into the margin. I check my character tag. I find the one called emphasis italic. And once more, looking at it, I can see it makes it Myriad Pro. It changes the angle and it leaves everything as is. What I'll do though is add one more feature. I'm going to give it a background color of yellow. I'm just going to set it up so that it looks a little bit like somebody's run a highlighter over it, and I update all. So what I've done is I've redefined the tag. If I click up in thermal protection now, you'll see that it has background color of yellow. It still has 14 point, weight is bold. Plummet has 12 point, the weight is regular, but it also has the background color. And again, always click into the margin for safety's sake, choose your character tag, emphasis italic, and then redefine any of the properties to whatever it is that you need them to become, and use your update all. I'm going to retain overrides. Any differences that exist, I don't want to blow away. If I was to use the remove override, watch what's about to happen. I'm going to click in thermal, but I want you to keep an eye on plummet as well. So plummet is currently a smaller font, etc. I click in thermal and I decide, you know what, that background color of red, I don't like it. I think yellow is a much better color. Update all and remove the override. What I've done is I've redefined EI emphasis italic to always be all of the properties from thermal. Not what I wanted, because you can see down here where it reads can plummet has also changed to be blue and italic and much larger. So I'm going to Control Z, undo this. I'm going to click into the margin and choose in the drop down emphasis italic. I'm going to change my color to yellow. And I'm going to choose update all. Once more, I retain. I'm going to keep the differences. Thermal is italicized. It's yellow. It did not change the color or the size. Plummet is italicized. It is yellow. It did not change the color or the size. If I want to create a new character format, again, I like clicking in the background into a neutral space in my document, and then I choose Command's New Format, and I give it its properties. I'll call this one NF New Format, and I create. And it's just created a format, a character tag called NF New Format, where absolutely nothing is defined. But now I can choose it from the drop-down, and I can go in and I can set up all of the properties. I could decide that the new format is going to have some horrible things. I'm going to make it Wingdings. So I choose Wingdings in the drop-down. I typed it in order to get to it a little quicker. I'm going to make the Wingdings appear in bold. I'm going to set the color for the Wingding to be magenta, and I will set a background color on it. This is going to be horrible. I'm going to set a background color of orange. and update all. So I've redefined it. I'm going to retain any overrides or differences that may exist, and let's test it out. In here, I have to scroll down a little to find it. There's new format. Here is the new format that I just created. Horrible stuff, terrible. So let's go in and clean that up. I'm going to choose delete. I'm going to find my NF, new format, and then click delete and choose done. Remember that delete removes it from the catalog, so I can never go in and redo some of these things. Let me try that again. Delete, new format, delete it, choose done. There we go, gone from the catalog, but it's still in use in the document. It didn't delete the text. So what I need to do is take this content, and I'm just going to double click it. Got to be a little careful. And in the bottom on the left, you can see flow A, BC body content, and then for the F, the character format, there's an asterisk NF new format. It's basically saying, hey, look, you've got a new format that has been applied here, that character tag, but it's not in the catalog. So it just remains as an override. I can fix that by making it into a default font. And when I fix these into the default font, it's gone forever, or at least until such time as somebody comes along and recreates that type of a mess. Last piece that I'm going to cover inside this video is some of the basics of page layout. When you are building your own templates, I would suggest that page layout is one of the earlier things that you consider. You want to have an idea of what kind of content you're going to have in your document, how it's going to exist, headers, footers, page size, tables, graphics, and that's going to all come together into your finished material. But before you can create indents, before you can create your headers and footers, before you do any of that, get a good idea of what your page size is. Now in this case, it's an 8.5 by 11. It's a default page size for FrameMaker, and I zoom away so that you can see a lot of information, then I'll zoom upwards. So inside this document, I have on the first page a bit of a custom look and feel. It has the one, it has the title. Into subsequent pages, I end up seeing all kinds of additional information, some graphics and tables. If you look carefully on the third page, I actually have a table that's set up to be the width of that column. So this is the reason I suggest you do these things first. I'm going to go in after the fact and show you how to tweak around things on the page. Some of these things are going to mess things up, cause problems. This is a sample file. You can always build this file again. You can go in under File, New, find the document, do the Show Sample, and you'll get something similar to what's on screen here. So it's a totally great environment to test, to play with ideas. So let's start off with a few of the different things that I can do. Under Format, I have Page Layout, and in Page Layout is Column Layout. I like this one. There's some really cool stuff. Right now, the column layout is set up to leave room for side heads. It's going to leave a width of 1.75 and a gap of 1/4 inch. That's why you can see that there's a bunch of text running inside my document next to or inside of some of that blank white gap. On the third page, for example, where I've got the mouse right now, there's absolutely nothing in the side head, whereas on the previous page, the title goes across the side head, there's some sort of a note, there's another note, all of that's in the side head. I can redefine the size of this thing. I can make it 1 inch with the same gap, and I update the entire flow, and you'll see that the gap in between becomes a little narrower. If I go back in and I choose Format, Page Layout, Column Layout, I can take the side head and turn it off completely, and I update my flow. And now there's no gap at the side for any of the text to appear. Lastly, Format, Page Layout, and Column Layout to turn on the side head and put it back to 1.75, update the entire flow. It's very quick to set this up, to configure it, and then the only piece you need to remember is that when you're doing your paragraph design, that you set up things to appear or not appear in the side head. So taking this paragraph and taking a look at the paragraph designer, you'll see that this is a note type, NT tip, and that paragraph is set up to be in the side head lined up on the top edge. I won't zoom in on this, but I'm just going to change it to in column and update all so that you can see the difference. Now the note is in the body of the document. If I put it back into the side head and I update all, first baseline or top edge, depending on what my preference is, at this zoom, you're not going to see much of a difference at all. But that gives you a little bit of an idea of the side head. going to also take some of these headings that I have, the heading 2, and reset it to appear anywhere and update all. So rather than top of a page. And that just puts more stuff together so that I can show more demonstrations of some of these properties. All right, format, page, and column layout. You can decide how many columns a document has. I'm going to make this into a 2-column document, and this is a weird one. It's going to have the side head, and then it's going to have the 2 columns. When I update the document, it says, look, there's a couple of things that are going to be a little too wide, a little too narrow. So you can see that the graphic, for example, on the second page bounces off of the space available, so that's something I'd have to clean up. My table is large enough that it automatically goes across both columns. But with the side head, it's a little weird to get the idea of a 2-column layout. So very quickly in FrameMaker, page layout, column layout, I'll just turn off side heads. Update the flow. Now it's a 2-column document. It looks a little more like a traditional 2-column document, especially if you look onto this page where most of the content goes across from one column into the second column and then continues onwards. Again, some of the graphics, some of the tables are large enough that they extend across both columns, and FrameMaker will do its best to outline. But if you have created content and then you start thinking about your page layout, you're doing it backwards. Consider your page layout, come up with what kinds of options work for you, and then develop the content after. You should have an awareness of both, but changing around your page layout is something that you should never do after you've created all of your content, unless you're willing to go back and rework your tables, your graphics, potentially your paragraph tags in order to accommodate. The nice thing with FrameMaker is that if you do know what the settings are supposed to be, it is incredibly simple through the column layout dialog to go in, allow side heads, make it a single column document. Maybe I want to give it slightly larger margins. Maybe at the top, I'll give it only 1/2 inch. On the inside, I'll leave it. On the bottom, I will give it a 2 inch. And on the outside, I will give it a 2.5 inch. So these margins are a little goofy. I'm going to update the entire flow. And again, relatively quickly, I can change around my margins. Now they run into the header, almost. It's a little problematic. They allow for a very large gap on one side of the page, but not the other. Again, relatively problematic, but Frame makes it so quick to go in under Format, Page Layout, Column Layout, and reset things. So I'll just make these margins all back into 1-inch margins. I will leave the rest, I think, pretty much as it is, update the entire flow in my documents back to its initial layout. Very, very quick set of changes. This is one of the really powerful features when you're working with FrameMaker, is the page configuration. I'm going to go in and play with the idea of a brand new document, and to put that together, I'll choose File, New, Document. I'm just clicking on Portrait so that I get a standard page size. There's some configuration you can do here. You can see that mine shows up in centimeters. So if you'd like to, you can choose View Options. And right away at the beginning, if I'm doing template development and I build my page layout, I go in and I find out what's the local unit of measurement that I need to work with. And if it turns out that I'm working with a European client, when I choose File, New, Document, instead of just going with a portrait or a landscape, I could do a custom page and choose from the drop-down to go with any of the options that are here. So I could choose an A4 letter if I'm dealing with somebody in Europe. You'll see that it automatically changes everything to centimeters because the unit is centimeters. Should you want to, you could actually change that into an inch. So it gives you the inch measurements. I'm going to take the document that exists, which is a standard 8.5 by 11 page, but in mine it opens up with centimeters showing, and just show you how to toggle that. You can go in under View Options and set up my display units to be inches. And if I'm doing that, I probably want to change my display to also have a grid space of 1/8 of an inch and to have rulers that show up based on, let's say, 1/8 of an inch in aesthetic. So again, FrameMaker gives you the option to configure any page size to set it up with the unit of measurement that works best for you. Maybe you prefer to work in centimeters when you're on a 8.5 by 11. Maybe you prefer to work in inches off of an A4 page, at least when you're doing your initial work. You can always change some of these things as you work your way through the document. I'm also going to go in with this document and make a couple more quick changes. Format, Page Layout, and in Page Layout, change my columns so that I have 4 columns. I choose Update Entire And you can see that now I have 4 columns. Here's my first, my second, my third, and my fourth. And each of them has a gap in between it. That gap in the column width is automatically calculated. You do that through the Format, Page Layout, Column Layout dialog when you set the number of columns and you come up with a gap. Balancing columns is a neat one. As you add content, it'll just make sure that it adjusts it so that instead of filling all of the first column and then all of the second column, what you might do is fill the first, second, third, and fourth column roughly halfway. So the balance columns is really nice. If you have multiple columns, you're okay with having blank space towards the bottom of the page, and you want to make sure that it's even across the columns. As a bit of an example, let me go in and balance the columns and update the flow. I'm just going to change the zoom and type in a bunch of gibberish. And once I've got a bit of the gibberish started, you can see that these are being balanced. It's filling in across all 4 columns. If instead I come along and I choose to format the page layout and not balance the columns, then it's going to ensure that it fills in the first column. And then once that first column is filled in, I'm just doing a copy and paste. It continues into the second and it continues into the third. So depending on your preference, you can set it up to do one or the other. Page layout, column layout, balance columns. Your margins I've already mentioned, and in FrameMaker there's now the ability to set up content so that it flows left to right or right to left, or it inherits, which means that you have full control over languages other than English that don't flow in the same fashion that English does, where we write on the left, works its way towards the right, and then it goes to the next line and the next line and the next line. There's full support for multilingual publishing and design inside FrameMaker. So canceling that out, let's go take a look at a couple of other options. Let's do a little more work around the idea of page layout. Inside the file right now, I've got a bunch of basically gibberish content that I've just added in. It doesn't have any real value. But I'm going to click at the beginning. I'm zooming in on this, and I'm just going to put in, at the very start of the document, heading. I'll write Canada. I press function 9, F9, and that allows me to go through the keyboard method of assigning paragraph formats. And I'm just using the default, so I type in title, TI for title. There's Canada. And inside this document, I'll click somewhere and I'll put in heading 1 for Ontario. And I'll add one more heading 1 here. Heading 1 for Quebec. Zooming out on the document a little bit, you can get a better feel for exactly what I have here. But with a multi-column document with multiple headings, I'm going to start doing some really quick changes. Don't try to do this in most author tools. FrameMaker has some beautiful publishing functionality. I'm going to combine ideas that we've talked about earlier. So I've got a custom 4-column layout. In my paragraph designer, I'm going to take this paragraph and set it up to be across all columns for starters, and I choose Update All. So now Canada stretches across all columns, and then my text continues onward. I'll take Ontario, and I'll do the same thing, across all columns and Update All, which means both Ontario and Quebec automatically update. And if I change around some of the text that's inside here, and I just put in a couple of breaks in the paragraphs, you can see that the content for Ontario goes across all 4 columns. The content for Quebec goes across 2. If I wanted to, of course, I come along and I choose Format, Page Layout, Column Layout, and I can balance those columns. Now Quebec also goes across all of them. It looks a little nicer. And I can set up things like headers and footers, margins, page layout, so that it reflects the word Canada, or page 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. So if I just take a little bit of the text that I have here and duplicate it so that I can get a few more pages worth of content. There's Ontario across a couple of pages. Here's Quebec across a couple of pages. And then maybe I'll add in one more piece down here, make it into a heading 1, and I'll put in Alberta. And now I have content that spans multiple pages. It's not the prettiest content because it's got a bunch of gibberish in there, but I'm trying to display the idea of page layout. By the way, 3-column layout, I like it a little more than 4-column. Stuff's really, really tight. So all I'm going to do is format my page layout, my column layout, so that it goes to 3. And done. Nice and quick. Empty paragraph up there. Maybe I edit my text a little bit and I take out a few pieces. There's Quebec at the top of the page. I take out a bit more content, and as soon as the space is enough, Quebec falls onto the first page and Alberta is on the second page. So quick, easy types of changes to make inside the document when it comes to layout. And now I just write and create and modify content. Let's set it up though so that the word Canada that's seen up here is repeated onto the next page. Now this is inside a paragraph called title. FrameMaker has something called a master page, and the master page is just the page that drives the look and feel behind the scenes of all of your content. So you have your main text frame right here. I've just control-clicked to select it. I'm going to click in the margin to deselect that. And it also has a header up above it. Again, I control-click just to draw your attention to it. Then I click away from it in the neutral margin so that I don't do anything. And I single-click inside the header. Now this paragraph is set up and named header, and it already has a couple of properties for tab stops. There's a center tab stop and a far right tab stop. If I click down in the bottom of the page, and I've just highlighted, I'm going to single-click down here. This is footer. If I'm in the footer, and I'm zooming in a little bit, and I press tab, it moves to the middle. So I'm going to type in page, single space. And then I can come through, and there's a couple of different ways that I can go in and tweak my headers and footers, but one of the easiest ones is format header and footer. I'm just going to insert the page number. So it reads page number sign, which is kind of goofy, but if I view, I choose view and I move back to my body page, I can take a look at the bottom of every page, and now it reads page 1, and the next page is going to read page 2, and the next page and so on would be page 3 and 4 and 5. I'll scroll back up. I'm also going to go in and once more view master page, and in the header I'll click, and this time I'm going to tab not once but twice so that I'm on the far right of the page, and then I will choose under format header and footer, and I'm going to insert something other than the page count, or the date. Now this brings up the variables pod, and I could have gotten to that just as well by going through under special and choosing variable. So if I wanted to, I can go in through the menu, or I can go in and have the software do some of the work for me. On the far right, so I just make sure that my insertion point is still here on the far right, and I scroll downwards a little, I have a set of running HF, and the first one is called running HF1, and it's already coded to be the text of the title. Nice and quick, I double click it. I'll take my variables and close this entire tab group. I don't need it. I've inserted one variable. I will then view my body pages. And that running header footer is dynamic. It reads Canada on this page, and it reads Canada onto the next page. So if I continue to scroll downwards, there at the top of the page, I can see Canada. And this is going to be repeated on every single page that uses the same running HF variable. So now I come through and I need to do one or two more little things in order to get the document going. For example, on the first page, I have Canada, and then I have Canada, whereas on the next page, it's great. So if on the first page I change around this text and I say, hey, instead of Canada, I put in something like Canadian provinces and territories, and I just press Control-L to refresh my screen so that it actually forced an update right here visually. But now it reads Canadian provinces and territories, which is great. And if I change this and it reads instead United States, and I change some of these headings from Ontario into California, etc., what I would like it to do is automatically update the header. And technically it has, but FrameMaker doesn't redraw it. So every now and then you can either do a refresh or literally scroll down, scroll up, and it redraws that information. So I'll just do an undo for Ontario, an undo for Canadian provinces, an undo for Canada, and there it is. It's a little messy. If you get one of those graphics glitches, you can always go in under Window and refresh, or Control-L. So there's the refresh. It now reads Canada at the top of the page. If I zoom away a little bit, now you can see two pages. It would be nice if my first page perhaps started with this content a little lower. Maybe it had some graphic in it. Maybe this word Canada was to go away. I'm just going to undo and put it back where it was and view my master pages. And as a way of closing out this information, I'm going to combine together a couple of things. I'm going to do a bit of work with the paragraph designer. I'll do a little bit of work with the master pages, and I'll show you what the effect is inside the document. There's one tricky piece in this that has to be done. And again, this is template setup. It's a one-shot. You build your templates, and then other people use the templates, or you use the template. So you don't have to do this every single time for every single file. The idea of FrameMaker is different than that of Word. Word is really kind of a trying to be everything to everyone document, which is nice if you're going to go in and you're just creating a bunch of one-offs or you need to throw together a quick document. But if you need professional manuals, if you're going to be putting together content that needs a consistent look and feel from start to end, FrameMaker has a lot more power. So inside the FrameMaker environment, I'm going to start off by choosing Special and adding a master page. Right now, there's only one master page. It's called the right page, and that's the default look and feel. So I'm going to add one called Cover. I could name it anything, but Cover kind of makes sense. And when I go ahead and create this, it adds a page called Cover. It's the second of two pages. It looks exactly the same as the previous page. It has the same header. It has the same footer. It has the same body. It has everything. I don't want everything. I want to further configure this. So carefully, I hold down Control and I single click and delete. That got rid of the header. Again, very carefully, Control, single click. Now I release Control, and what I've done is selected this entire text frame with sizing boxes. So I can take the top middle box and click and drag it downwards. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, it tells me that the height is now almost, there it is. It's a 7-inch height, or I bring it down further, it's 5.375. Bottom left of the screen, I'm going to bring this down to be 7 1/4 because I feel like it. There, 7.25. This page is named Cover. If I view my body pages, you can see that I have a paragraph here called Title. It would be really neat if instead of doing this, don't do this. If you're playing along at home and you're watching the video and you're pausing it, this is not what you should do. Don't go in under Format, Page Layout, and apply a master page usage scenario where you would say, hey, I want to manually force this to use the cover page. It's a neat idea to use the cover page, but an even better idea is to set up FrameMaker to do the work for you. Because you may end up in a document where you have a cover page, a left and a right. Maybe you have oversized graphics and tables, so you need a rotated left page and a rotated right page. Maybe you also have a couple of other page layouts. For example, in a chapter, you might have a chapter cover and a section cover, and you want to have it as one big file, but you want to be able to change your page layout on the fly. So let me show you an example. I'm just going to duplicate content. Normally, I wouldn't suggest doing this. Normally, I'd say make 2 or 3 files, but I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to create 2 documents and make a couple of quick tweaks. I'm going to change this text to United States of America. I'm going to change Ontario to California. I'm going to change Quebec to be New York, and I'm going to change Alberta to be Montana. So I've made a couple of changes here. I'm also going to take this phrase, United States of America, and using my paragraph properties, I'm changing the designer's pagination settings so that it always starts at the top of a page and update all. I Control L or I window refresh so that I can see it a little more clearly what's happened. I'm going to make this into a 2-column layout. Let's see what that does. Format, page layout, column layout, 2. Okay, there we go. Now it's got a 2-column layout. It's changed it a little bit. I'm also going to give it some side head space. So format, page layout, column layout. And normally I'd probably do all of this in one shot, but I want you to really see the changes as I work my way through. I'm going to give it a side head that's 1.5 inches, and I'm going to give it a gap that's 1/2 inch. And I update the entire flow. So now the content again is set up with side head. That's probably too much of a side head space. And notice some weird stuff like Canada is not centered. I mean, it's centered, but it's not centered all the way. So I have some cleanup to do. In Ontario, I'm going to set that up so that it's actually in the side head. And the same with Quebec. So that'll change things around a little bit. Let's work with Canada first. All right, here we go. I'm going to set it up so that it's across all the columns, which it already was, and the side head. And because it's centered, when I update all, it's now centered, and it's truly centered from left to right in the available space. Ontario or Quebec, I highlight those. I'm going to put it into the side head, and I update all. And so now you'll see that Ontario and Quebec, as soon as I click Update All, they jump over, and hey, there's Alberta. Again, there's a little bit of a graphics glitchiness down at the bottom of the screen here. Control L or window refresh. A couple extra pieces onto the next line, so be it, or onto the next page. But I am going to go in and I don't like the side head space as it currently is. So one more time, format, page layout, column layout, and I'm going to make the side head space a little narrower, 1.25 with a gap of 1/4 of an inch, and update the entire flow. I like that a little better, actually a lot better. There is United States of America. It's at the top of the page. I've got a bunch of stuff sort of bouncing around. This content runs down. Everything looks pretty sharp compared to what we had previously. A few more things that I need to do. I want to take Canada, which currently has the text up at the top that also reads Canada, and tweak that so that instead of it just having the word Canada at the top of the page twice, it uses the custom master page. So I have a paragraph called title. That's important to remember. I also have, if I go in and view my reference pages, or sorry, my master pages, I have a page here called cover, capital C. If I am in the body pages, so I'm going to view my body pages, there's a command FrameMaker has. I'm going to zoom out even further so that you can see more content. There's a command FrameMaker has that allows me to format, page layout, and then apply master pages automatically. So FrameMaker, when you choose format, page layout, and apply master page, is going to go through the document and automatically configure page layout. And it does this in order to read your rules and make changes based on the rules. So I'm going to change the rules so that this first piece, which starts with title, and this United States of America that also starts with title, ends up on its own custom master page that starts lower in the document. Let's go and take a look at how to do this. After I've done my application, the reference page has built some code, and it's tricky to find it. It's on the last page, but I'll zoom in so that you can see it. This is my unstructured master page map, and it has this specialized table in it, and I can type in a paragraph name. Well, I have a paragraph called title, and I have a cover page that I use. It's a single-sided document, so it's on the right-hand page for a single sheet. So what this dialog or what this table is doing is setting it up so that I can have multiple paragraph tag names. In this case, I've only got the one for title. And if title happens to be on a right-hand page, it will automatically use cover. This is a single-sided document, so left-handed master page. I don't have to fill it in. And it's going to make the change for just a single page. So if I view my body pages, and once more I'm going to zoom out, watch this page, and watch this space, which may actually end up bouncing to the next page. When I choose Format, Page Layout, and I choose Apply Master Page, it's automatically bumped this page down, which meant that there was so much text it ended up going to the third page, which doesn't matter because afterwards it finds that America is on the fourth page and it changes it. And if somebody comes along and edits the content a little bit so that things now flow back, well, now I have United States of America at the top of the third page, but the page layout is on the fourth one. No biggie. Format, Page Layout, and at the bottom, Apply Master Page. And it says, oh, you mean that page layout. And it updates the page layout. Now, why does it have a 3-column layout instead of a 2? Well, it's because when I went in and created the master page, and if I view the master pages, when I created this master page, I was still in a 3-column layout, so it retains the properties. You can have different properties. For the very first page of my document, I'm going to Format, and I'm going to go in and change around the column layout. And if I change my column layout for my pages, it's going to impact the default left-right. So if I choose to change the column layout, I run into the problem where I may not end up getting the result that I expected to this one. Well, there's good news for that as well, because I can go in and under Format, I can customize this one text frame and do a couple of additional bits with it. And this will be my last change. I'm going to make it a 1-column. I'm going to leave everything else exactly as it is and apply it, and then view my body pages. And now you can see I've got a 1-column layout on my first page, 2-column layout with side heads, and then back to the 1-column layout. If I adjust content, and I actually take a little bit of this and I copy and paste it so that I end up with more content, United States of America is on the top of this page. No big deal. Format, Page Layout, Apply Master Pages. Everything's redefined. When I zoom in and I start on the first page, which is Canada, there's no header. There is, however, a footer that reads page 1. The next page reads Canada. And as I continue through my document, I get to my third page, which is on Canada. I get to the fourth page, which is United States of America, so it has no header. And I get to the fifth page, and it reads United States of America. So through a combination of working with paragraph tags, character tags, and some of the table properties that I've shown you here, you can pretty quickly get a rather unique looking document. It doesn't have to be something that no one else has ever thought of, but you can get a rather unique document that has a look and feel that you like. It can have multi-column, multi-page layouts. It can have paragraph and character formatting that is configured in all kinds of different ways. And what you end up with at the end of this is a basic template, something that has page layout, character format, and paragraph format. My suggestion, if you're going through this video and you want to actually try these things, because all of this was created using nothing but default FrameMaker documents. One of them was created by choosing File, New, Document, clicking Explore Standard Templates, and in the templates, I used the first screen user guide chapter and I did a show sample. That was the first file that I worked with. The second file was literally File, New, Document. And if you want, you can just click Portrait or you can choose Custom and tweak it a little bit right at the beginning. But it was a generic document in order to make it as easy as possible for anybody who watches the video to create the content and to test some of the ideas that I've demonstrated. Thanks again for taking the time to watch the video. If you do want to test this stuff, I would suggest go back, watch the video, jot down a couple of little timestamps when it gets to things that you want to review. So for example, if you're watching and you say, oh, at 17 minutes, Bernard explains this feature, just write down on a sheet of paper 17 minutes and what the feature was. Don't try to pause it and write all your detailed notes. Watch it once more, jot down those minute markers, go back afterwards, jump ahead to the minute markers, and create some of your more detailed information. The video is yours to use as you see fit. Good luck with this. I hope you get the opportunity to play with FrameMaker and to get a better understanding of some of the functions that are available when it comes to developing really interesting page layout and design. Good luck with it. All the best.